Presenting Benny Goodman and his music.
Hey everybody, we got about a 10-minute pre-show here if you're tuning in on the YouTube. Below me here, St. Paul's Church on Broadway, World Trade Center in the background. Hey Mona. Hey Larry, hey Martin and Vicky.
Benny Goodman, ladies and gentlemen, the man with the torrid clarinet and the even more torrid band who purveys assorted rhythms, all danceable, in the urban room of the Congress
Hey
Hotel.
Mona, hey, a bit notification, that's good.
And first of all,
That's
one of
good
Irving
news.
Berlin's greatest hits, Blue Skies.
Hey Patty. Hey Kathleen. Hey Timothy. Hello Susan. Did all get notifications? I decided I'd do a full-length one this morning. I don't know if it's really full-length. I threw it all together this morning based on research from mostly like the last 2 days. This is all very recent stuff that we're going to be covering. Hey Diane. Hey everybody. Welcome along. Yeah, it's a shirt that's for Halloween but really too hot for Halloween, so we're just going to wear it all year round. They're really too much of a hot weather thing. Except for those damn October days when it's hotter than it needs to be. Hey Dina. Hey everybody. Welcome along. Hey Georgie! Georgie, we believe you. Oh, hey, Diane. Well, thanks. Rearranging church for little old me. Hey, Tony in Egg Harbor. Miles is mad right now. A friend gave us an old armoire. We're using it as mostly for tea, honestly. Tea and Tupperware. But we just filled it up, one of the cubbies, with tea. And now he can't get inside of it anymore. He's so mad about that. Hey, Cassidy. Hey, Maureen, Gladys. Hey, Bella and Doreen. Hey, everybody. Yeah, we had some storms last night, too. Hey, Heather. Nice, good crashing storms. I woke up with a song in my head that I don't think exists. I think I dreamed it up, so I quick recorded that. Nine to 12-year-olds. Oh, I will think happy thoughts. Who did I deny admission? Oh, yeah, Miles. Okay. No, he can still get in there as it's a much more narrow space. Morning, Laurie.
And Ellen Ward singing With All My Heart.
No, 9 kids that are 12? Ay, ay, ay. I don't usually work with kids that age, you know. All I'll ever care for. The tricky thing with middle schoolers is they're immune to the food coma. Generally with high schoolers, we take them out for a big dinner at the end of the night, they'll be zonked. Middle schoolers, it just winds them up more. Would I have gone on that submarine to see Titanic? No, not that one. Especially if it was going to cost $250,000, I would have Googled to make sure it was a safe one. To make sure it was up to all the standards and there weren't all kinds of things about it not being safe. If it was free and I wanted that was more reliable, I'd be curious. I don't think there's really much to see there anymore. Oh, hey out there in Cedarburg. Strawberry brat? Okay. Morning, Luann. There's the man himself. Hey, Miles. Miles, you gonna come up and see me? I know the desk is a mess. I got books all over it and stuff. Hey, Beck, and Marita, and Alex. There's only one fool killer submarine we ride on around here. Do I ever watch Turner Classic Movies? I don't get Turner Classic Movies, I don't think. I watch classic movies, but I don't have the channel.
Benny Goodman goes way back and gets a lot of rhythm out of Walk, Jenny, Walk.
I'll dip into Titanic nerdery occasionally. Like, you might remember a couple of years ago, for a couple of weeks, Find a Grave Friday was all Titanic people in Chicago, who were buried in Chicago, passengers, etc. But Titanic nerddom is a very crowded field. There's a lot of real specialists in that field. Diane, I can see a cherry brat a little bit more. Welcome along, everybody. Christine, that's one of those goofy conspiracy theories. Quite easily refuted. I would argue it's more. I would argue it's more crowded. It's a trickier nerdery. It's a more, because it's only one event. Civil War, I still find stuff that never gets debated or never gets brought up all the time. Well, look who's here. Here comes Lily. Making a tentative entry onto the scene. Oh, and Priya's back on the couch over there. So right now, you've got... Who's the other big guy? I don't know where Miles went. He was here a second ago. Lily is very outgoing now. I don't know if she's going to want to hop up here. This is still Miles' territory. Miles is over by the window here. Do I think the moon landing was staged? You think they could have gotten that past the Russians, Christine?
And now another one just in the same vein. Rosetta.
Stuff like that, like the Titanic was planned, the moon landing was staged, Bush planned 9/11. There are things that make stupid people feel smart. Hey, Kathleen, hey, Bella. Yeah, Deanna, you guys having a way? We have Lenora's in the hospital for a while, so we've got Lily, her cat, living with us. Georgie, no, Charlotte passed away about 2 years ago now. It has been a while. Hey, Amy, good morning, everybody. We'll get a couple extra minutes here. Miles and Priya are both in here right now. Priya's on the couch, Miles is in the window. Turn it a bit, you can see a bit of Miles there. So at least he's in position. I miss Charlotte too. She was such a nice cat. Now, Lily is, you can't have any food anywhere or she'll try to steal it. The stove is not safe. I've never had a cat that I had to worry about getting on the stove before. Morning, Sherry Ann. Happy birthday to Karen's dad. Yeah, it's a Halloween shirt, but it's for hot weather, so hotter weather than we usually have on Halloween, usually. All right, this is about the point at which we normally get started here. So, all right, everybody, welcome along. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours. I've been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for going on 20 years now. See how Priya the cat has just taken up a space on the green chair, and here comes Miles right behind. What was. All right, so welcome along, everybody. We normally do tours, full-length tours on Thursday nights. We used to do them on Thursdays and Sundays. I've had to cut back a little bit just for my own sanity, but I do have a full-length bunch of material today. So, as you know, I've been a tour guide for a long time. I'm incredibly famous. Books such as Mysterious Chicago, the book, H.H. Holmes, The True History, and most recently, Graceland Cemetery, Chicago's Stories, Symbols, and Secrets. It's kind of an open secret. It'll be announced later this week, I think, that my next book is going to be about cemeteries in Lower Manhattan, graveyards, all proper graveyards. So what I've been doing the last couple of weeks is just that. The contract is in hand. I've agreed to the terms. It just hasn't, all the paperwork hasn't gone through. I'll announce it and who the publisher is very soon. So now I've just been researching all of these old Manhattan graveyards. Where, let's see. They look kind of like this. I had another pretty good one up here. We'll find it later. We'll come to it later on. But the thing is about this it occupies a whole different era in American history. These are graveyards from the late 1600s, primarily to about the early 1800s. Burials in them largely stopped right around the time people first started being buried in large numbers in Chicago. So there's not a lot of overlap with the history. I'm finding myself on lots and lots of side quests. I have to research more details about what apprenticeship was like in colonial New York. I have to learn about organ building has been coming up. A lot more about Aaron Burr. I knew enough about Aaron Burr to get by, but it seems like every damn story that I researched this week, these guys had some kind of connection to Aaron Burr. That guy was just everywhere. So it's just been one pile of research after another. I don't even know. I can't even keep going back to stuff that I researched 2 days ago and was thinking, wait, what was that story again? Which guy was was that? And that was 2 days ago. So, partly just to keep my head in order and give myself a refresher, I decided today we would do just some stuff from these New York cemeteries. Most of these are things that I've been researching in just like the last 2 days. That's how much is going on here. So, let's move on in. Just to look at what we're looking at here, this is Trinity Churchyard. This is one of the 2 sections that I've been researching the last 2 days. Over here, well, now we're getting into 1C. I haven't really covered 1C yet. Quite a lot of these are unidentified. Even some of the larger ones, they have no idea who this was ever a gravestone to. I've been able to find a couple of them. That's very exciting for me. There's, various things were written down in the 1830s that you can now dig up. There's Alexander Hamilton, the big tourist draw these days. And you can connect Hamilton and Burr to half of the people in these New York cemeteries. They were very active in New York social life back in those days. So here, we go around backwards at night. I'll show you an example of one of the things that I've been working on here. Is one of the fun things is trying to solve the mystery of who some of these gravestones are for. And a lot of them that you can't read, the parish, Trinity Parish, does have the data. They've got a database up that you can look at that has even some of the lost epitaphs. But I found some more of them. Right over about this situation. That's a night watch, but not a ghost. I totally thought it was a ghost for a second myself. There's a statue of John Watts, last city recorder, royal recorder of the city, but really not that interesting. This large one here, that one is unidentified. Then you got this row of 3 down here. Starting with James Waghorn, who was a Japanner. It was a kind of lacquering, Japanning cabinets and stuff. That was his job. And then in the middle, this really cool spooky head for a guy by the name of Andrew Mills, who was on Her Majesty's ship Greyhound, which was a privateer. Before he set sail on it, he even wrote up a thing saying, let me actually read it out. He wrote up a will in which he said that he was in perfect health and memory, but in bodily health, but considering the dangers of the sea. He left everything to his wife. Now, in the middle, we've got this other one that is not in the database and is completely illegible. However, while digging around on stuff on Andrew Mills, I happened to find this article in a magazine called The Crayon from 1856. And the Crayon had a whole bit about how they were starting to use more marble in New York buildings and thought, if you want to see a good example of why that's a bad idea, go over to Trinity Church. You've got this Waghorn in sandstone. You've got this Andrew Mills in sandstone. Both of them are perfectly crisp and you could read them. Then the one in the middle, and this is in 1856, they said it has a blurred appearance. The letters have lost all sharpness. The entire surface of the stone is roughened, very much like sugar when partially dissolved. In fact, it looks mean, coarse, and stingy. I got to imagine he would be very gratified, whoever wrote that article, it's uncredited. I got to imagine that he would be absolutely gratified to see what it looks like now that it's completely beyond recognition. But at the time, in 1856, you could still read it. So hence, it turns out this is a monument to a guy named James Stephens, who died in 1767. And it used to say, after a faithful service rendered to his king and country amid scenes of hardship and danger in Europe and America, died here of a fever in 1767. It's remarkably, I couldn't find too much more about this James Stephens fellow. He sounds like he had quite a life for king and country. But that's kind of what I've been doing, is piecing these things together and then figuring out, most importantly, who these guys are. But let's move on up a little bit. Over on the other side of the section, this is kind of the section of the last couple of days. And most of this is made up of vaults. Underground here, this whole place is just kind of honeycombed. You can see we're well above ground level here, off in the distance. This place is just honeycombed with subterranean brick vaults that extend under this addition to the church that they added in 1964. We're going to see these ones in a second. They're coming up. We'll cover those ones shortly. Also, I always try not to show too many people walking around. There's a flag there for Hercules Mulligan, even though he's definitely not there. He's either underneath the church or in a whole different burial ground. But this is the section. What you see here is just these flat stones that usually say vault of or sepulcher of. Then if you were to move those or dig in front of it, there's a vault access shaft that goes down to a door. This is one that they found empty back in the 60s when they were adding this addition. This would have been right about here. Underneath there, these spaces about roughly the size of a one-car garage that were for interments. And these were the only places you could inter people in the place after about 1822, when Manhattan mostly stopped inbound burials. But also this ramp that you see over to the right here is pretty new. So just a couple of years ago, when they added the ramp to be more ADA compliant, they had to add some new markers for where the vaults were. And these are vaults that they're never going to open again. But we've got this one right here, Matthew Davis Sepulcher, 1818. And in the background here, you can see Hamilton in the background, which is especially interesting, as you got Davis here. Davis was known around town for a long time as the old boy in specs. He's remembered by historians as a guy who never found a dishonest dollar he didn't like and whose political acumen was always for sale to the highest bidder. One time he pulled every dirty trick at Tammany Hall to get his friend nominated for a position. Then when somebody came to congratulate him, he said, well, watch this. Now I'm going to make sure he loses, which he then proceeded to do, apparently just for the fun of it. But he was the best friend, possibly the only remaining friend, of Aaron Burr. He had been the second at Aaron Burr's duel with Alexander Hamilton in the back, and now he's just right across the yard from Hamilton, and even refused to testify against Burr. He went to jail for a while because he refused to cooperate with the jury. But later he ended up being in charge of writing all of Burr's memoirs. Burr gave him all of his letters, except that he openly admitted that he was cleaning it up. He had a stack of letters from Burr that he said indicated no large morality on the part of various female companions. He thought that by destroying these letters as soon as Burr was dead, he would save his reputation, but really he just allowed future historians to use their imaginations, which we have done quite freely. So Burr ended up having a biography that was written by Matthew L. Davis. Davis got involved in any number of schemes over his years. He became kind of the prototype for Tammany Hall, the political machine that would run New York in the 19th century. Nobody liked the guy. William Seward, Lincoln's future Secretary of State, called him a broken-down politician in the 1830s. But then when he died, everybody seemed like they suddenly had a soft spot for him. Nobody had ever said a nice thing about the guy before, but all of a sudden everybody had their own favorite Matthew Livingston Davis story. Everybody had a couple of them. Newspapers traded anecdotes about the guy for quite a while after his death. And right off to the side of it, right off over the edge, you can see just a little bit of the Clarkson Vault. This is for a guy named Matthew Clarkson, who is one of our kind of neglected founding fathers now. He was an aide-de-camp to Benedict Arnold before Benedict Arnold turned traitor. That was a little bit younger than most of the other founding fathers. He was just really a teenager when all of that happened. But then, at the end of the war, he became Assistant Secretary of War for a while. But what he's mostly remembered for is he was one of the earliest members and eventually the president of the New York Manumission Society. Before the Revolution, there was no anti-slavery society in New York. There was only like one in the whole country. And in New York, as of like 1750, something like 40% of the population was enslaving other human beings. This was just broadly unquestioned. It would be really dismissive and misleading to say it was milder than Southern slavery, but it wasn't like people had plantations with hundreds and hundreds of people. People would have 2 or 3 people living in the house with them. However, Clarkson stands out as one who never engaged in that sort of thing, and right from the start was saying that we have to stop it, introduced bills for gradual emancipation, and which they eventually passed really fairly quickly before the turn of the century. It took about 20 years for it to completely take effect, but when a couple of years after he died, the last enslaved people in New York finally officially became free, and at the celebrations, they were prominently showing up pictures of displaying these portraits of Matthew Clarkson. It was also in 1819, he had been the chair of a committee to oppose letting Missouri enter the nation as a slave state. And this was a really big thing. The Manumission Society seems like it was really just a couple of dozen guys, half of whom did own slaves themselves. But in 1819, when this started to be an issue about whether slavery was going to expand, whether it was going to be in new territories, the meeting houses were just packed. And Clarkson wrote up the thing saying, not only do we oppose its going, we believe that slavery is a moral and political evil in the United States. It would be a few years before it was finally out of the way completely in New York City. But by that time, it was certainly dying. He didn't live to see it end completely. It took me a few minutes to make sure that he was actually in his own vault, too. So he's not actually in the database. There's an M. Clarkson, but both of his wives are there. There's funeral accounts saying that he's being interred in Trinity Church. So we can go by that. But the database does help a lot to find some of these. There's this one marker here for someone named Deborah. It just says Deborah on there, which is really the only visible marker, the only monument above the vault of a guy by the name of John B. Coles. In the 1790s, one of our biggest problems in New York was yellow fever. And this is actually something that happened because of slavery in New York. Mosquitoes used to be unknown in the United States, but the Dutch slave ships were a welcoming environment for mosquito larvae. And so we ended up with mosquitoes because of the slave ships, and because of the mosquitoes, we had yellow fever, which would occasionally sweep through the city and kill, like, thousands of people, whole percentages of the population. And at the time, they didn't really know how it spread. It would be a long time before they knew that it was mosquitoes. At the time, one suggestion was that it was the bad water. So John B. Coles, after raising an awful lot of money for relief after one of the epidemics, joined with a bunch of other people to form a water company that was going to make new tunnels and get more pure water into New York, joining with Aaron Burr, who of course is in all of these stories. But Aaron Burr pulled one of his dirty tricks here. In the charter for this New York water company, he also had a little thing in the back saying, if there's any leftover money, we can use that to make a bank. Now, Hamilton's Bank was the only one that was running in New York at the time, so all through this, Burr created a rival bank. They did some water work, but not that much. And very quickly, the company became much better known as the Bank of Manhattan. And eventually it got bought up by Chase. It became Chase Manhattan Bank. Coles was not happy about this. He was a Federalist where Burr was a Democratic Republican. He and one other guy became kind of the token Federalists on the Bank of Manhattan board and stuck with it for quite a long time, even though they didn't necessarily agree with all of what was going on here. Now, Coles, we know from manumission papers that he did enslave at least one person, a woman named Peggy, but he freed her in the early 1800s, and then was on that committee in 1819 against the spread of slavery. I do tend to give one of the most difficult things is how to reconcile, how to deal with, how to comment on the fact that so many of these people were enslavers, and in general, the length of the book does not really allow to turn everything into a polemic against it. But I will give a little bit of extra points. With a lot of, like, if they were just a merchant or something, if they own people, I don't want to whitewash it, but maybe you just don't get to be in the book. In Cole's case, well, we can at least say that he got better. You got to allow some extra points for people who got better. And one similar thing. So under the law, what it ruled was that babies born to enslaved mothers after July 4th of 1799 would be indentured servants for 25 years, then they would be free. So one of the stories that kind of tied in here is there's these two very crisp-looking graves. I'm sure they must have been restored at some point. But this was... Make sure my audio is going. Yeah, it is. This is Abraham and Frances Childs. I think they were brothers. I'm having a hard time figuring that out because there were a lot of Frances Childs running around, many of whom were much more famous than this one. Abraham was a tailor by trade, but at one point he had an indentured servant named Rose Butler. That's really what he's known for, is that he was the first one of the people who owned the indentures of Rose Butler, but he sold those over to somebody else, the Morris family, which they still talked about her. She was technically born right after the cutoff date, so she was never technically enslaved, but they kind of used the same language when talking about her. So she was sold, or her indentures were sold over to the Morris family, and the Morris family did not get along with Rose. Rose enjoyed going to the Hook, which was the place where they had all of the bars that catered to indentured servants at the time. It had all of the dancing. It had all of the brothels. She would get reprimanded and fight with what they called her mistress all the time about this, until finally deciding, on what she said was the urging of a couple of white men, to get revenge by burning the house down with the whole Morris family in it. And herself, she started the fire, went up to the boys' room where she usually slept, and the boys were saying, "What's that sound?" And Rose said, "Don't worry, it's just the cat." But then the father figured out what was going on, put the fire out. Rose was arrested, put in jail, said that she was put up to it by a couple of other men, but wouldn't say who they were. And the fact that their house did burn down while she was in jail kind of indicates that she must have had accomplices. But she was eventually found guilty, hanged, and buried in what is now Washington Square Park, about 1819. Move up a bit more from here. This video died on me, so right up in the edge here. This is the one that I was on last night. This is one that I got pretty excited about because they have a name in the database here, but it's spelled just a little bit wrong, and I'm not sure they really know what they've got here. This one, Miles, sorry, that was Miles. This one, according to the database, was a woman by the name of Eleanora Keene. Looked her up, couldn't really find a thing, but if you look really, really close on the bottom, you can't read names on it at all, so I wasn't sure. Like, how do we know this is Eleanora Keene? It's not in any of the old newsletters that were put out, but down at the bottom, you can faintly read a date of November 16, 1807. So I just looked up New York papers from that week and just looked up the obituaries, and lo and behold, there was a Mrs. Keene died in Greenwich Village. And it mentioned that she was the wife of R.R. Keene of New Orleans. That blew it wide open. Richard Rayburn Keene of New Orleans. Here's a dashing-looking guy. The fact that he's not wearing a wig in this portrait would have actually been kind of a thing, too. It was a way that young people distinguished themselves from the older generation. It was very radical to be pictured without all the trappings, without, fancy clothes, without wearing a powdered wig. So he was a law clerk for a guy named Luther Martin, who was known as the wild man of the Constitutional Convention. He was at the convention but refused to sign it. Was by this time, the early 1800s, was generally known as a drunken lout, but he had a daughter, a 15-year-old daughter, named Eleanora Martin. And Richard fell in love with Eleanora, asked for permission to marry her, and Luther said, well, I thought this whole thing would blow over, so I said, fine, you can in a couple of years. But the two of them carried on an affair clandestinely. And this is, by modern standards, the age gap 22 and 15 would be, it was still a little shocking then, but not very shocking. But they carried on an affair with help of her friends, some of whom were adult women, one of whom specifically counseled her, you should never listen to what your parents think when you're planning to marry someone, only listen to yourself. So she, from a letter or two of hers that survives, we can see that she was a dramatic young woman with a taste for adventure. And she was swept up in this guy, Richard Rayburn Keene. Richard Keene later on would try to buy Cuba. He would negotiate with the pirates of Barbary. He would be a soldier in Spain fighting Napoleon for a decade. At one point in 1798, he had some kind of scheme in mind. Nobody knows what the scheme was anymore, but he needed some money for it, so he wrote to George Washington. And Washington sent back a polite note saying, essentially, I'm not made of money. I can't just send money to everybody with a good idea, It was a little more polite than that. But they ended up eloping in early 1802, the two of them. And we've got a little bit, as soon as they did, her father announced, I am going to send you overseas. And what she wrote was, I betook myself again to my room and disclosed to Miss O my intention to escape. This lady, compassionating my situation, determined to serve me at every hazard. As soon as it became dark, with fluttering hearts and trembling steps, we gained the street door and seized upon the bolt. The door was locked and the key taken out. We determined to persevere. So she managed to make her escape, ran off to New Orleans with her new husband, Richard, at which point her father started writing a pamphlet, a series of letters called Modern Gratitude, which I had up right here, but it seems to have disappeared on me. It was about 150 pages of ranting about Richard Rayburn Keene and how he had perverted the heart of his daughter. Keene responded with a pamphlet of her own. Eventually, there's about 200 pages worth of these guys sniping at each other. But given that this guy had such a lust for adventure and wild and zany schemes, a guy with this much of a love of schemes almost inevitably had to run into Aaron Burr. In 1807, Aaron Burr was still trying to live down the fact that he had shot Alexander Hamilton. He had been passed over for another nomination as vice president. He was never going to be president now. So he came up with some kind of harebrained scheme that historians still haven't exactly figured out. The basic plan was he was going to start a new country down in the Louisiana Territory and parts of Mexico, starting a whole new country. This is known as the Burr Conspiracy. Historians still haven't figured out really what his plans were or how far he got or how many people were working with him on it. The general sense is he thought, well, I can't be president of this country, so I'll go start my own. And down in New Orleans, one of his 2 or 3 people who were arrested along with him was Richard Keene right here. So Richard Keene ended up on trial along with Aaron Burr, and the lawyer representing him, representing both of them, turned out to be Luther Martin, Eleonora's father. And during the course of this, he even put out an affidavit saying, my son-in-law and my daughter did nothing wrong. He was blameless in the affair. The only thing they did that was questionable was go against my wishes. Now, it's tempting nowadays to just consider Eleonora, and we really probably should consider her just a victim of a rapscallion who got her caught up in his whirlwind. But on the other hand, this is also a very different era, and she would absolutely have rejected that description herself. So she ended up dying shortly after that trial in 1807. She came up to New York feeling ill, and then died in November of that year. This actually marks the space of a vault underneath, and as far as I know, she might be the only person inside of that vault. And just to make this a little bit wilder, also her grandfather was Michael Cressup, who was buried on the other side of Trinity. Michael Cressup was a captain in the Army. There was, in some of the fights against Native Americans, a guy named Logan's whole family was killed, and he gave a whole oration saying that I was always the friend of the white man, but now who is there to mourn for Logan, specifically calling out Michael Cressup for having killed his entire family. And this was an oration. This was a speech that like every schoolboy learned in the early 1800s. The trouble with it was he had been misinformed. Cressup didn't actually have anything to do with that himself. It was just Thomas Jefferson heard a rumor about it and wrote a thing about it. Turned out to be a case of mistaken identity. And her father, Luther, ended up being buried at St. John's, that cemetery a few blocks north that we went to on a morning mini tour while I was in New York a month or two ago that is now a playground. By most accounts, somewhere around here, all of the gravestones are buried. In some accounts, they just piled the dirt over them and left them where they were standing. And more accounts, they were piled into a pit. But somewhere underneath here, there must be lots and lots of gravestones buried. We'll cover in one other one. I think this one was actually researched a couple of weeks ago, but just to tie it in thematically to what's coming up next in the tour. Now, one thing I'm really unclear about. This is Captain James Lawrence. I'm really unclear as to whether he's in a vault or buried in the ground. I've been asking about it. I'm not sure even they know, honestly. If his wife was buried in the 1860s, it would make more sense for her to be in a tomb. If it was a ground burial, she would have been probably the most recent in-ground burial at this cemetery. Otherwise, it's Eliza Hamilton. But this is young Captain James Lawrence, a portrait by Gilbert Stuart, who also did the Aaron Burr portrait I keep on posting, and the unfinished portrait of George Washington that is where we get the $1 bill. But he was a young, kind of a rapscallion himself. He was a Navy captain, and at one point, somebody put in a thing in the newspaper saying the Navy wasn't all that good, and he put in a thing saying, our sabers are strong enough to cut your ears off, and we will too. Then showed up at the newspaper office calling everybody a damned rascal, which effectively was starting a duel. But they just kind of laughed him off. But during the War of 1812, he was the commander of the Chesapeake. He went after another British ship and effectively sent them a duel challenge, saying, let us meet ship to ship and try our colors against each other. And this was very foolish of him. The British captain had a similar-sized ship and had been commanding them for years. Lawrence had just taken command of this ship a couple of months before, but he told all of his men, enjoy your dinners, we shall have blood for supper. The battle lasted 15 minutes and he got his butt kicked, but famously he was heard to remark, don't give up the ship, as they took him down below with his wounds. Though less remembered as he then said, no, I take it back, burn the ship down. They didn't burn the ship down. They did, in fact, give up the ship. It was a rash, stupid move that went against orders on his part and cost dozens of lives, hundreds of casualties overall. But the Navy just kind of did what they did and just made a martyr out of the guy. Don't give up a ship is still kind of an unofficial motto in the Navy. But we'll just kind of tie him over. We're at just up the road at St. Paul's. Or another couple of them that you can't quite identify. But back over here is one that's nothing really legible on here now, at least from any side that you can access, but they do know that this was the grave of a guy by the name of John Dixie. And it used to say that he was a sculptor by profession. But one of the things that I've noticed from looking up his various ads, he ran a looking glass and ornamentation shop. You could buy things like mirrors, you could buy, like this is a decorative mirror of people mourning at George Washington's tomb. Okay. And architectural ornamentation, or we would carve statues for you or sell posters and prints, what we would now call posters and prints. He did a real boom in sales on that portrait of Captain James Lawrence after the loss of the Chesapeake, and had previously done a really big boom making copies of busts of Alexander Hamilton after the duel. This was a copy he did of a bust of Hamilton that was done by a guy in Italy that Eliza kept with her for the rest of her life, really, and really held close. Mourning mirror, so weird. But one thing that he came up for quite a lot in the paper, did John Dixie, was advertising for runaway apprentices. Now, at the time, you would the way that young men got experience in work is they would sign a contract to become an apprentice for about 7 years. But now and then, they would learn enough to start thinking, hey, I know how to do this job now. I can go get a job and make money. But they were still under contract, so they would have to run away and try to get somebody to hire them. And Dixie had it happen quite a bit. Quite a number of his apprentices ran away, at least 3 of them that I could find, and usually he would put out papers saying, do not hire him or you will answer to charges, and offer a reward of between $5 and $20. But one day a guy named William Wood, who I guess must not have been a very good apprentice, showed up, ran away. So he actually put out an ad saying 1 cent reward. Ran away the 20th instant, an apprentice of the subscriber named William Wood. All persons are cautioned against harboring or employing him. The above reward will be paid and no charges by John Dixie. Move over just a bit to the side end. Got the Oculus, the new train station. And right by the entrance is a little marker for George Eaker, but the marker is actually facing backwards. When the lighting is just right, you can just about make out the name on the back of this one. George Eaker is the guy who shot Philip Hamilton, Alexander's son, in a duel in 1801. Now, the circumstances of the duel are pretty well known. He was at a theater. Philip Hamilton and a friend came in and started, for one thing, talking through the show, but also making fun of him relative to a speech he had given 4 months earlier at the 4th of July. Now, I haven't been able to get a full copy of the speech. I've got quite a bit of it. It was published, but it's really hard to get a copy these days. It doesn't seem to be scanned anywhere. You got to be in just the right university library. But I was able to find some excerpts that were published in papers at the time. It was a 4th of July speech. This young, ambitious lawyer, George Eaker, gave a big talk about Thomas Jefferson. And the big thing was pointing out that religion has no place in our laws. Religious interference only hurts. Look what's happened in every other country. This would have been a response to the recent election. In the election of 1800, the Adams supporters, the Federalists, were all saying that if Thomas Jefferson is elected, he is an atheist. He's going to burn down all of the churches. Which seems like hyperbole, but you got to remember he had just been in Paris where they were actually doing stuff like that. And Eager's response was, if he's an atheist, so what? But this would have been going against things that the Federalists had been saying against him, people like Alexander Hamilton, which is apparently why Philip took all of that offense, leading to the duel. Now, one other quirk that I found is the last time before that he had made the news was making a lot of noise about his displeasure at the fact that Aaron Burr had been nominated for vice president. He preferred another candidate. But just over off to the side here, there's also this one. I'll just kind of close on this. These are a couple of guys named Sumner and Lucas. They were soldiers in the 1780s, one from Massachusetts, one from Georgia, who both died around the same time and ended up buried here. Sumner had Hamilton as one of his pallbearers. And usually when they transcribe this now, they have a kind of a shared couple of markers. There's a couplet at the bottom about alike they ranged the glorious field that spread over the two markers between them. Most things written about them now say that they both died of yellow fever aboard the same ship. That's not carried over in contemporary accounts. Sumner, it says, died of eating poisoned dolphin, or food poisoning from eating a dolphin captured off Cape Hatteras. Sumner was a grandfather of the Charles Sumner who eventually made an anti-slavery speech as a senator and had Preston Brooks, a Southern senator, come and beat him to within an inch of his life with his cane right there in the Senate. Now, in about the 1820s, on the request of his father, Sumner came to St. Paul's and made a sketch and description of what these graves looked like. At the time, they were in need of repair. The sketch survives. I couldn't find a scan of it anywhere. The only place that seems to have it is the Sumner Papers at Harvard. But I've got a request in for a scan of it now. I love it when I get to use research libraries at schools I never could have actually gotten into in a million billion years. So those are stories mostly that I've researched the last 2 days. A couple of them go back to early this week. But all right, everybody. So that is just about full-length morning tour for Sunday. I still haven't decided what I'm going to do on Thursday. I probably should have held out and did this one then. By then I'll have probably 10 or 20 more stories to work on. The next in-person one is going to be July 8th. That's Architecture of Mysterious Chicago. But I got a bit of an announcement for you guys. Haven't decided what yet, but a month from that, on about August 12th, that Saturday in August, we'll be doing a couple of tours. I don't know which ones yet, but what I do know is Eli's going to be there. So if you've ever wanted to meet the Dead Ringers in person, they're going to be coming to town this August. So all right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours. With that, we will put the Benny Goodman back on and just hang out like we always do. Thanks for everybody who's helping me to keep the lights on, because this New York Cemetery book is probably not going to pay for itself. I'll probably pay more on research than I'll actually make off of the book. It happens sometimes. If I was working just for money, I would have done some other career, I'm sure. But here's Benny Goodman, everybody.
Chicago.
That was probably two of the Graceland book too, but Graceland I can use it to promote tours, so it pays for itself. Trinity and St. Paul's, you can only have 5 or 6 people at a time. Einbett mal, Lisa. Lübeckischer Einbett mal. If you want to use a Patreon ticket, just email me. I may not see the comments. What is the oldest grave I saw in New York? The Stuyvesant tomb is probably the oldest. The oldest one at Trinity is a kid named Richard Churcher who died in the 1680s. The last person buried there, I'm not really sure. I think it would have been one of the rectors or something. There's still a couple of the vaults that are accessible enough that ashes can be interred there. I did find one at St. Paul's. There was a woman buried in the 1940s under the porch. They had to like dig out under the porch to get to the vault. And she was, her mother was of the Schuyler family. Elizabeth Hamilton would have been like her great-great aunt. And their lives overlapped a little bit. She was like 92 when she died. I think she was 6 when Eliza Hamilton died. So like even into the 1940s, there could have been somebody buried at St. Paul's who remembered Eliza Hamilton's funeral. Very good chance that she would have met. And was old enough that she might have at least had vague memories of her. I haven't decided a thing about the August 12th one yet. It's a Saturday, whichever day Saturday is. There might be an evening one. Maybe we'll do Grave Robbing 101. I can fit a lot of people on Grave Robbing 101. Probably a cemetery. It'll probably have to be Graceland. Just because Rose Hill have their own tour going that day. We could possibly... I don't know what time he's flying out on Sunday.
That was the bugle call rag, Benny Goodman's own arrangement. Now, popular tune, Thanks a Million.
What's especially hard is finding all of these stories and then trying to compress them down to about 400 words. I want to fit as many people as I can into this book. And I keep having this like, what? It took me a long time to find anything about Eleonora. She spelled her name differently than they got in the database, so she was a tough find. But once I looked up her, I was like, oh, in the Burr conspiracy trial. Like, what? I found another one of these co-defendants is in like the next vault over too. I'm not sure where Richard Keene ended up buried. Hey Abby, sorry you overslept. Well, once we're done here, it'll be up, of course. I'll have to talk to Eli about what his plans are for that weekend.
Down Harlem Way, they're all trucking. And here's Helen Ward to tell you all about it. Trucking.
Just the same. I've gotten pretty good about trimming stuff down. Like I had the Graceland book had to be 70,000 words. This one's got to be 60,000. Where might not so famous residents of New York have been buried in the mid-1800s? They would have been probably at Greenwood, up in Brooklyn. Manhattan burials, unless you had an old family vault, which didn't necessarily mean you were famous. Maybe you had a great uncle or something who might have been, or even then, most of them were just merchants. Alex, yeah, I guess I do. I should maybe switch my Switched to a Rainbow Apple Watch bands, too. With the bodies trucking. Got a cool Chicago story to work on today, too. I got to get one up for Patreon this week, but I got a cool one set up. It's been basically untold. A friend of mine wrote an article about it a few years back. There we go. That's just this. It kind of matches the shirt. I try to coordinate. Have I found the cost of a vault in Trinity? No, I really haven't. I'm finding like different accounts. And others, there's one of them, I can't figure out how the guy became the first burial in a vault way into the 1880s. I think it must have been somebody else's family vault that he won in a card game. Maybe the other rainbow one will look better. Yeah.
Benny Goodman presents On the Alamo.
Everybody's trucking like the Doodah Man. Oh, there we go. This matches a little better. Heather, it was our pleasure for sure. I love the deb, but I hate the parking lot scene so much. Every time I go and think, I'll buy a veggie burrito. I'm gonna go and enjoy it this time. And every time it's these strung out losers, middle-aged losers with their asses hanging out of their pants, picking fights with everybody. This week, some guy kept following me around saying, "You should know I'm full Rambo." And your teeth are full of nacho chunks. Another guy was throwing beer bottles at cops. Which is weird because generally it's a rather right-wing group. A lot of bootlickers in that crowd, except when they want to take drugs. Alex, we actually just did Time Travel Pub Crawl. That was probably my face, but it was kind of a cobbled together job.
Benny Goodman and his orchestra, and hear Helen Ward sing Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo.
It was when the Time Travel Pub Crawl was one I did last year. I didn't remember that I just kind of mostly just cobbled from other stuff. When am I going back to New York? I don't have another group scheduled until January. If there's some Bob Dylan tour dates in the fall, I'll probably go in the fall. If not, I need to go back. I need to do more research there this summer, but you kind of run up against how much money I'm going to make on the book anyway. I've got about enough pictures. There's not too much that I really need to see there, that I really need to go to or photograph, I don't think. But at the same time, I don't want to use too many pictures of the people, because they all have the same haircut. Again, as much as I love the Dead, they've been playing effectively. They may mix up the set list, but it's basically the same show for the last 50 years. You get about an hour of songs about cowboys and uncles, then the jams and space drums, all culled from like the same dozen or so songs. I mean, it's a great show, but it's the same structure every time. But lately I've had to make so many long drives, putting on a 3-hour show of spaced out jams of Stella Blue will work out is a good way to spend the time. But I actually love Disco Daddy. I'd love to see West LA Fade Away and Shakedown Street in the same show. Well, I love Shakedown Street. People tell me this town ain't got no heart all the time, and I can hear it beat out loud. Miles is presently over here in the window. Carol, this book will cover Trinity, St. Paul's, the African American burial ground, probably St. Mark's of the Bowery, probably a little bit of the other St. Patrick's, Old St. Patrick's, probably St. John's, and some of the other defunct ones. But it's all kind of space permitting at this point. Oh yes, Sheereth Israel then. I'll be hitting Sheereth Israel too, which is goes back to the 1600s. But all right, everybody, I gotta be checking on down the line. So everybody, have a great day. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours, telling everybody to stick around tomorrow for Mural Monday. Until then, stay safe, stay strong, and stay spooky.
And here's a short encore.